I spent years planning the perfect family trip, only to watch my own parents hand it to my sister. But this time, I refused to be the family's doormat, and what happened next shocked them all. If you've ever been overlooked or taken for granted, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story proves it's never too late to stand up for yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your story too. I can still remember that morning as if it were yesterday, though decades have passed. The kind of morning that lingers in your memory, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because it revealed truths you couldn't ignore. I was in my early 40s then, yet the lesson I learned that day would stay with me forever. "You're late," my mother said sharply as she stepped out onto the porch, pulling her suitcase behind her. Her tone wasn't harsh, she rarely raised her voice, but there was a sharpness to it, a clipped edge that made my stomach tighten. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 6:02 a.m. 2 minutes late. 2 minutes, Mom, I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I got caught in traffic. I got out of the car, moving to help with the luggage, but my eyes caught a sight that froze my smile. My younger sister, Olivia, was stepping onto the driveway, her own suitcase in hand. Something in my chest constricted, a slow tightening that made it hard to breathe. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, even though it trembled slightly. My mother turned to me, her face bright and cheerful, far too cheerful for what she was about to say. "Oh, Violet, we decided Olivia should go instead of you. She's been so stressed lately and really needs this trip." My hands went rigid on the car door. "Instead of me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, though I wanted it to thunder across the driveway. She waved her hand dismissively as though I'd pointed out something trivial. "We're grateful, sweetheart, but you've always been working so hard. You can take another trip later. Olivia needs this now." I swallowed hard. Every plan, every penny saved for years, all the meticulous research I'd done, seemed to vanish in her words. I had paid for every hotel, booked the flights, even planned the guided tours. I had spent nights awake imagining the look on their faces when I surprised them with the dinners I'd reserved, the excursions I'd lined up. And yet, here I was, pushed aside without a thought. Olivia, of course, had the decency of a smirk. "Thanks for understanding, sis," she said, her tone coated with fake sweetness, as if I should feel proud to be her benefactor in spirit. I clenched my jaw, biting back the sharp retort that threatened to escape. Instead, I forced a tight smile and opened the trunk. "Let's get going then," I said, my voice flat, stripped of warmth. If they wanted to prioritize her over me, fine. They could go with her. But they wouldn't enjoy the luxury I had carefully orchestrated. The drive to the airport was suffocatingly quiet, broken only by Olivia's incessant chatter. She rattled on about TikTok trends, shopping in Paris, and whether the tours would allow time for sightseeing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with every word, my knuckles white, my teeth clenched. My mother chuckled softly, oblivious to my presence. "Of course we'll have time," she said. "We'll figure it out when we get there." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I almost drew blood. When we get there. They didn't even seem to notice that I wasn't really part of this we anymore. My father shuffled out a moment later, avoiding eye contact as he handed me his suitcase. "Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual," he said, his voice tentative. "Unusual?" I repeated silently in my head, a bitter laugh threatening to escape. "Unusual? That's the word you choose for replacing your daughter at the last minute on a trip she planned and paid for?" Olivia leaned forward from the back seat. You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really generous of you. Her smile was innocent, but I could feel the fake gratitude like a dagger. I forced a tight smile. Of course, enjoy the trip, I said. By the time we reached the airport drop-off zone, my patience had worn thin. I helped unload the luggage mechanically, my movements precise, controlled, while my mind replayed every detail of the years I had spent being the responsible one. My mother hugged me. Thank you for understanding, sweetheart. This means a lot to us and to Olivia. I nodded stiffly, unable to conjure warmth. Olivia wheeled her suitcase toward the entrance. Thanks, Violet. You're the best, she chirped, turning back briefly to smile, as if my approval mattered. I stood there, watching them disappear into the terminal, chest tight with anger and hurt. On the drive back home, the silence inside the car mirrored the silence I felt growing in my heart. Over the years, I had become the family's fixer, the one who smoothed over mistakes, who absorbed the disappointment and frustration of others to keep peace. Not anymore. When I finally arrived home, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, replaying the conversation over and over. Then, a decision crystallized, sharp and clear. If they wanted to prioritize Olivia, they could figure out the consequences themselves. I marched into the house, powered up my laptop, and began systematically cancelling every hotel reservation, every tour, every upgrade I had booked. Confirmation emails piled up in my inbox, each one a quiet victory. They had assumed I would swoop in, fix everything, and save their trip. They had underestimated me. The calls started almost immediately. My phone buzzed relentlessly as I unpacked the suitcase I'd prepared for myself, the trip that was no longer mine. My mother's name flashed across the screen repeatedly, accompanied by urgent texts. Violet, the hotel won't let us check in. Call me immediately. I laughed quietly, a short, sharp sound. Fix this? After what they did? I ignored the calls, letting the buzzing fill the room with its own intensity, knowing that for once I wouldn't cave. Finally, I answered one call, if only to quell the incessant ringing. My mother's voice came through, thick with disbelief. What did you do? The reservation is gone and none of the tours are booked anymore. I cancelled them, I said calmly, my tone deceptively neutral. A stunned silence followed, broken by her sharp hiss. Why would you do that? I let the words hang between us. Oh, I don't know, I said, voice laced with sarcasm. Maybe because you decided to take Olivia on my trip. She snapped, rage threading her words. We thought you'd understand. Understand what? I asked, my voice rising, my years of frustration spilling over. That all my planning and saving meant nothing because Olivia needed a break? I don't understand, and I don't care to. Goodbye. I hung up, tossing the phone onto the couch. The silence that followed was sweet, almost intoxicating. For the first time in years, I could breathe. The quiet wasn't just the absence of their voices. It was the absence of their expectations pressing down on me, the absence of the constant responsibility to keep everyone else happy. Over the next few days, I avoided turning my phone back on. I spent mornings sipping tea on my back porch, afternoons tackling small projects I'd put off for years, and evenings journaling about what I wanted for myself. It was strange, this feeling of having nothing to fix, nothing to manage, nothing to prove. But it was exhilarating. When Grace stopped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee and an unreadable expression, I laughed before I could stop myself. She set the cups down. I heard about what happened. she said softly. I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Probably. My mum called you, didn't she? Of course she did, Grace said, a sly smile creeping across her face. She was fishing for an ally. I told her you were busy and would call back when you were ready. You're the best, I said, genuinely, letting a little of the tension seep out. No, you're the best, she replied, suddenly serious. You finally stood up for yourself. Don't let them drag you back down. Her words lingered long after she left. She was right. I had spent far too long bending over backward to please people who never noticed, never appreciated, never really cared. It was time to reclaim my life, and I was ready to do it, one decision at a time. The days after I cancelled the trip were quiet. Too quiet, in a way that made me nervous at first. My phone remained off for most of the morning, but by evening, curiosity, or perhaps a sense of responsibility I was trying hard to suppress, made me switch it on. Over a dozen missed calls, nearly 40 text messages, and a stack of voicemails awaited me. My chest tightened, but not with fear this time. It was anticipation. I wanted to see how long they would stew before realizing I wasn't going to rescue them. The first few messages were from my mother, each one growing more desperate. Violet, call me back right now. This has gone too far. We can't get into any of the hotels. Please fix this. You've humiliated us. We are your parents. How could you do this? Olivia's texts followed, dripping with entitlement. This is so petty, Violet. You're ruining everything. Just fix it. Finally, a voicemail from my father, quieter, but no less pointed. Violet, we need to talk. Please call us back so we can sort this out. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow, measured breath. For decades, I had been the one to solve every problem, smooth over every mistake, and absorb every complaint. That was my role, the invisible glue that held everything together. But this time, I wasn't going to pick up the pieces. Not for them, not for Olivia, not for anyone. When I finally answered the call, it was my mother. Her voice hit me like a wave, frustration, worry, disbelief, all wrapped together. Violet, this isn't funny anymore. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I took a slow sip of tea, my voice calm, deliberate. Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail, and then being told you're not even part of the trip you paid for. There was a long pause. I imagined her scrambling for words, trying to rationalize what she knew couldn't be rationalized. Finally, she said, her voice tight. Olivia needed this more than you. Yes, I said firmly, letting my anger rise just enough to sting. Olivia needed a vacation, and I needed to be treated like my time, effort, and plans mattered. But they didn't, Mum. So I stopped being your doormat. That's the difference. The silence stretched across the line, heavy and suffocating. Then Olivia's voice intruded from the background of the line, her whiny, sharp tone cutting through. Mum, she's being ridiculous. Just fix it already. Enjoy your trip, I said, my voice icy. Oh, wait, you can't enjoy it. It's not your trip. It was mine. Now it's nobody's. Goodbye. I hung up and placed the phone on the counter. For the rest of the evening, I felt an odd mix of relief and lingering anger. I wasn't proud of my small rebellion. It was petty in some ways, but it felt righteous, necessary. The silence, after decades of emotional noise and constant obligations, was intoxicating. I could finally breathe. The next day, I focused on myself in a way I hadn't allowed in years. I spent the morning on my porch, watching the sunlight spill across the garden, letting the warmth fill the parts of me that had long been cold from disappointment. Afternoons were for tackling projects I'd shelved for years. Small home repairs, organizing photo albums, finishing half-written letters I never sent. Each task, mundane as it was, gave me a sense of agency I had long forgotten. By the third day, the phone began to buzz again. This time, I answered, not out of obligation, but curiosity. My father's voice was on the line, heavy with weariness. "Violet, your mother wanted me to call. She thinks maybe you'll listen to me." "Go on," I said, leaning back in my chair, crossing my arms. He sighed. "This has gotten out of hand. Your mother's upset. Olivia's furious. It's a mess. But you're better than this." I stiffened. "Better than what, Dad?" He hesitated, then said cautiously, "Better than standing up like this, punishing everyone over one decision. It's not like you." I laughed, short and bitter. "You're right, it's not like me. I've spent decades bending over backward for people who didn't appreciate it. I've kept this family running, absorbed every complaint, every disappointment, every demand, without question. That's not me anymore." Another pause, then quieter, almost pleading. "Violet, you're punishing the family over one decision. Isn't that unfair?" I straightened, voice calm but firm. "Unfair? Do you know what unfair is? It's being replaced on a trip you planned, being told your hard work doesn't matter, being expected to serve as everyone's emotional and logistical assistant while your needs are ignored. That's unfair. This is just me finally leveling the playing field." I could hear his exhale, slow and hesitant. "I don't know what to say," he admitted finally. "You don't need to say anything," I replied. "Just understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first. Goodbye, Dad." I hung up, hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from the weight of finally claiming my boundaries. For days, I allowed myself to feel every emotion: anger, hurt, relief, and even a strange thrill at the idea of autonomy. I was no longer tethered to their expectations, no longer responsible for everyone's happiness except my own. Grace, my lifelong friend and confidant, came by that week, sensing the change before I could explain it. She carried 2 cups of coffee, her eyes curious, knowing, almost expectant. "So, what happened?" she asked, setting the cups on the table. "Ah, the usual family drama," I replied with a smirk. "Only, I finally decided to stop cleaning up their messes." Her smile widened, but it was serious underneath. "Violet, this is huge. You've been the fixer for as long as I've known you. You finally stood up for yourself. That's not just huge, that's revolutionary." I laughed softly, leaning back. "Revolutionary, huh? Feels more like overdue." "No," she said matter-of-factly. "It's a reminder. You're allowed to have a life that isn't constantly consumed by the expectations of others. You're allowed to put yourself first. Don't forget that." Her words lodged themselves in my mind, rooting deep. I realized then that my years of acquiescence had not been out of love alone. They had been out of fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of disappointing. Fear of being seen as selfish. That fear had stolen decades of my life, shaping me into someone I no longer recognized. But now I was reclaiming myself, one decision at a time. The weekend brought a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I spent Saturday wandering through my neighborhood, discovering little cafes I'd ignored, parks I'd never explored, and shops that had opened while I was busy ensuring everyone else's happiness. Sunday, I dug out old journals, reading through entries from 10 years ago, dreams I had long forgotten because they were always second to someone else's desires. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life driven solely by my own choices. Solo trips to places I'd always dreamed of, mornings spent writing, afternoons learning new skills, evenings simply enjoying my own company without guilt. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, the freedom of absolute responsibility for my own happiness. That evening, Grace called. "So, what's next?" she asked casually, though I could hear the curiosity in her tone. I thought about it, watching the sun dip low the horizon, casting golden streaks across my living room. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But for the first time in my life, it feels like I get to choose, and I intend to choose me." Grace laughed softly. "Sounds like the start of something amazing." It was. And deep down, I knew that this trip, or rather the trip I didn't take, had been more than just a confrontation with my family. It had been a turning point, a moment where I realized that years of subservience weren't my destiny. I could live differently. I could value myself. I could, finally, be free. The morning sun spilled through my curtains, a soft golden light that felt almost ceremonial, as though the universe itself was acknowledging my newfound autonomy. For decades, my mornings had been dictated by everyone else's schedule: laundry, errands, preparing breakfast for a household that barely noticed my efforts. But today was different. Today, I poured myself a cup of coffee, lingered on the porch, and didn't feel guilty for doing nothing but breathing, listening to the birds, and watching the world wake up. It was strange, almost alien, to experience this quiet, without the weight of expectation pressing down on my shoulders. For so long, I had carried invisible burdens: my parents' disappointment, Olivia's entitlement, the assumption that I would always be the one to pick up the pieces. But now, that burden was gone. Or at least, I had set it aside. And with it came a dizzying, thrilling sense of possibility. I decided that if I was going to reclaim my life, I would start small. My first step was a long overdue reorganization of the house. I dug through boxes of old family memorabilia, half-hearted souvenirs from trips that were never truly mine, and hand-me-down furniture that had silently dictated my living space for years. Each item I handled carried memories, some sweet, some sharp with resentment. I didn't just move things around. I gave them purpose or released them entirely. Old photo albums were sorted, letters I had never mailed were burned in my backyard fire pit, and furniture was rearranged to create spaces that felt like me. In the afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood, breathing in the crisp air and observing life happening around me without my interference. Families laughed, children played, couples walked hand in hand, and I felt a pang, not of loneliness, but of realization. For years, I had been present physically, but absent emotionally, always putting the happiness of others above my own. That stops now. By evening, I was on the phone with Grace, telling her every detail of my morning and afternoon adventures. She laughed at my enthusiasm, but I could hear the pride in her voice. "You sound lighter," she said softly, like someone who's been holding their breath for decades and just finally exhaled. "I feel it," I admitted, closing my eyes for a moment. "I've been living under everyone else's shadow for so long that I forgot what sunlight felt like." Her laugh was warm, comforting. "Good, keep it. Don't let anyone pull you back under it." The next few days were a blur of small rebellions that felt monumental. I enrolled in a local photography class, something I had dreamed of since I was 30. The last time I had picked up a camera was decades ago, tucked into a drawer while life demanded I be the responsible one. Now, I walked into the sea, lass with a backpack full of lenses, my heart pounding with anticipation and anxiety. The instructor, a cheerful man named Marco, immediately made me feel at ease. "You must have a keen eye," he said, glancing at the photographs I had brought along. "Tell me, what draws you to photography?" I paused, considering my answer. For so long, I had focused on capturing moments for others, family events, vacations, milestones, but rarely for myself. "I want to see the world the way I want to see it," I said finally, feeling a thrill as the words left my mouth, not filtered through someone else's expectations, but raw and unedited, just as it is. Marco nodded, a knowing smile on his face. That's the best reason anyone can have. The class became my sanctuary. Each photograph I took was a statement of self-possession, a declaration that I existed for my own joy and curiosity, not merely as a caretaker or a background character in my family's story. I captured the texture of bark on an old oak tree, the glimmer of sunlight on a puddle, the fleeting smile of a stranger in the park. Each image reminded me that beauty existed beyond obligation, and that I had the right to witness and preserve it. Evenings were spent reflecting on the past and planning the future. I began to draft lists of places I wanted to travel solo: Italy, Greece, Japan, New Zealand, and activities I had always postponed for someday, a day that never seemed to arrive when others dictated my life. I allowed myself the indulgence of dreaming without compromise, a sensation that felt both luxurious and terrifying. Then came the call from my mother, soft, cautious, almost vulnerable. "Violet, I just wanted to see how you're doing," she said. Her voice had lost the sharpness that once irritated me so much. We know you're upset, and we understand why. I think we may have handled things poorly." I set my camera down, holding the phone loosely. "Poorly? You replaced me on a trip I planned and paid for. Poorly is putting it lightly." There was a pause, and then she spoke, quieter this time. "You're right. We didn't realize how much it would hurt you." "And Olivia?" I asked, deliberately calm. "Is she reflecting at all, or is she still blaming me?" "She's upset," my mother admitted, "but I think she's starting to see how she could have handled things differently." I exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and lingering skepticism tightening in my chest. "This isn't just about the trip," I said softly. "It's years of putting her first while expecting me to fix everything. I'm not doing that anymore." "I understand," she replied, a fragile honesty in her tone. "We don't want to lose you." That was all I needed to hear, not an apology, not a promise, just acknowledgement. It was enough for me to know that I had been seen, at last. But I also knew that acknowledgement alone would not redefine my boundaries. I had to act, to reclaim the life I had delayed for decades. Over the following weeks, I focused on building a routine that centered me. Mornings were for coffee and quiet reflection, sometimes journaling or sketching scenes I had photographed. Afternoons were spent either in my photography class or exploring the city on foot, camera in hand, allowing myself to wander without obligation. I joined a local hiking group, meeting people my age who were just discovering the freedom that comes from asserting themselves. I started small, celebrating little victories, cooking a meal I enjoyed, spending an entire afternoon reading a novel uninterrupted, saying no to requests that didn't serve me. And gradually the guilt that had once tethered me to my family began to fade. I realized that their discomfort, their frustration, their attempts to pull me back into the role of caretaker were their issues, not mine. I had spent too long being responsible for feelings and situations that weren't mine to control. For the first time, I understood the liberating power of boundaries. One evening, As the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, I sat on my porch with my journal open. I began writing a list: dreams I wanted to pursue, skills I wanted to learn, trips I wanted to take. For the first time, there were no compromises, no second-guessing, no expectation to please anyone else. Just me, my aspirations, and the wide-open horizon of possibility. Later that week, after months of contemplation and careful planning, I booked a solo trip to Italy, a country I had dreamed of visiting since my 20s. This trip wasn't about proving a point, teaching my family a lesson, or even reclaiming what was lost. It was entirely for me, a celebration of independence, self-worth, and the freedom to create my own path. As the days passed and my departure approached, a curious calm settled over me. I wasn't anxious in the way I once would have been. There was no panic about leaving my family, no lingering guilt about prioritizing myself. Instead, there was anticipation, excitement, and a profound sense of empowerment. I was finally living life on my own terms, no longer defined by the shadows of others' expectations. When I boarded the plane, a strange exhilaration coursed through me. The realization struck like a bolt of lightning. For the first time in decades, I was truly free. The world awaited, full of experiences I had deferred for too long, and for the first time I was ready to embrace them, not as the fixer, the caretaker, or the background character, but as Violet, the woman who had finally chosen herself. The morning I left for Italy, the airport felt different than it ever had before. Normally, I would have been tense, double-checking every detail, wondering if my family would somehow call or text to derail me. This time, though, I walked through the sliding doors with a quiet confidence, my carry-on rolling smoothly behind me, my passport in hand, and a sense of purpose in my step. I was not running from anything or anyone. I was running toward myself. As I settled into my seat and felt the plane lift off, I allowed myself a rare, uninterrupted moment to breathe. For decades, my life had been punctuated by obligations to my parents, to Olivia, to everyone but myself. But as the city below shrank into a patchwork of concrete and trees, I felt lighter than I had in years. The air in the cabin was heavy with anticipation, passengers chatting and adjusting seats, but I felt nothing but calm, a serene bubble surrounding me. Arriving in Rome was like stepping into a painting. The cobblestone streets, the vibrant markets, and the ancient ruins stretched in every direction, inviting me to explore, to lose myself without pressure or expectation. For the first few hours, I wandered aimlessly, camera in hand, capturing the textures, colors, and people that made the city feel alive. Each photograph felt like a reclaiming of my attention, my focus, my ownership of the moment. I booked a small apartment in Trastevere, a neighborhood I had always admired in pictures. It was cozy, led with the scent of aged wood and fresh bread from the bakery below. The balcony overlooked narrow streets buzzing with scooters, bicycles, and chatter in a language that rolled beautifully off every tongue. I stood there for a long time, sipping espresso, watching life move in all directions, yet for once, not feeling the need to intervene, correct, or manage anyone's expectations. That night, I dined alone at a tiny trattoria recommended by a friendly local I'd met while photographing Piazza Navona. The waiter, a jovial man in his 50s named Enzo, made me feel welcomed in a way I hadn't realized I craved. He didn't ask why I was alone. He didn't offer unsolicited advice. He simply served the pasta with a smile and encouraged me to enjoy it at my own pace. For the first time in decades, I felt truly seen without judgment or expectation. Over the next few days, I allowed myself to fully embrace the rhythm of solo travel. I wandered through the Colosseum, marveled at the Sistine Chapel, and spent hours getting lost in the Pantheon. I spoke to strangers, some of whom became temporary companions in conversation, never forcing anything beyond what I wanted. I felt an odd thrill in navigating the world without a safety net, without the invisible leash of obligation. I was learning slowly how to trust myself, how to enjoy my own company without the need for validation. One afternoon, I visited a small, tucked-away cafe near the Tiber River. I sat at a corner table, a notebook open in front of me, jotting down thoughts and observations. For years, my writing had been for others. Letters, essays, and reminders that no one asked for. Now, it was just for me. I wrote about the sunlight filtering through the leaves, the way a musician's notes floated down the alley, the smell of freshly baked focaccia. I even wrote about myself, about Violet, the woman who had spent decades bending, accommodating, and sacrificing. By the 5th day, I began to reflect on the patterns that had governed my life. It was clear that my role as the family fixer had not been an accident. It had been conditioned over decades. Yet, for the first time, I realized I could step outside that pattern. I could prioritize my desires, my needs, and my well-being without guilt. The realization was intoxicating, a liberation I had imagined in passing, but never truly experienced. Florence became my next destination. I arrived by train, watching the Italian countryside blur past the window, rolling hills dotted with olive trees and vineyards. My apartment overlooked the Arno River, and at night I sat on the balcony listening to the water lap against the bridges. I was alone, yet not lonely. In fact, I had never felt more connected to life, to myself, to the present moment. During my stay in Florence, I visited the Uffizi Gallery, marveling at Botticelli's Birth of Venus and the works of other Renaissance masters. As I stood before each piece, I realized that life was fleeting, that time could not be reclaimed, and that beauty was meant to be absorbed, not filtered through duty. I took photographs of the details, of the marble textures and the subtle shades of paint, reminding myself that attention to beauty was a gift I could give myself, not just something to be catalogued for others. One evening, I wandered into a small wine bar tucked between two larger buildings. The bar was intimate, candlelight flickering across the wooden tables, and a single musician played a haunting melody on a violin. I ordered a glass of Chianti and simply sat, letting the music wash over me. No one was there to impress, no one to correct, no one to judge. It was just me, immersed in the present, and it felt sacred. Throughout the trip, I kept a journal of reflections. I wrote about my family, yes, but not with anger. Instead, I analyzed patterns, behaviors, and my own responses. I wrote about the long-standing dynamic of putting Olivia first, the silent sacrifices I had made, and the gradual shift towards self-prioritization. I documented moments of joy, frustration, and revelation, each entry reinforcing a truth I had finally embraced. I was enough. I had always been enough. One of the most profound moments came during a visit to a quiet church in Florence. I sat in a pew watching the afternoon light spill through stained glass, illuminating the dust motes in the air. It was serene, humbling, and humblingly personal. I felt the weight of decades lift from my shoulders as I realized that freedom was not merely the absence of obligation, it was the presence of choice. I could now choose how to live, who to prioritize, and where to invest my time and energy. That understanding brought a clarity I had never known. By the end of my trip, I had explored ancient ruins, wandered through bustling markets, tasted local delicacies, and captured hundreds of photographs. I returned home not just with souvenirs, but with a renewed sense of self. I had travelled not to escape, but to discover, and in doing so, I found parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. Upon returning, I found messages from my family waiting, tentative, polite, and cautious. My mother had texted, "Violet, we hope you had a wonderful trip. Can we talk?" I stared at the message, the weight of old guilt pressing lightly, but I felt no rush to respond. I had learned that communication should not be rushed, that boundaries were meant to be respected. I reflected on my journey, not just the trip to Italy, but the emotional journey that had led me there. I realized that true independence was not about isolation. It was about understanding your worth, asserting your boundaries, and cultivating relationships that honored those boundaries. I had learned that pleasing others at the expense of myself was not noble. It was self-neglect. Weeks later, I spoke to my mother on the phone. She sounded softer, her tone tinged with humility. "Violet, I know we hurt you. I hope you can forgive us, at least partially. We want to do better." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I know you want to, Mum. But this isn't about forgiveness alone. It's about respecting the choices I make from now on. I'm reclaiming my life. I hope you can support that." "Yes," she replied quietly. "We will try." I smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. It was a fragile start, but enough. I realized that I could love my family and maintain my independence simultaneously. I didn't need to carry their emotional burdens anymore, and they didn't need to dictate the course of my life. That night, I sat on my porch once again, sipping tea and watching the sunset. The familiar quiet of my home enveloped me, but it no longer felt constricting. It felt expansive, full of possibility, full of me. I thought about my travels, my photographs, my journals, and the countless small victories that had led to this moment. For the first time in decades, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had set boundaries, reclaimed my independence, and discovered the joy of living for myself. And while my family was still learning, still adjusting, I knew one truth above all. My life, my choices, my happiness, those were mine, and mine alone. I leaned back in my chair, watching the sky darken and the first stars appear. A smile tugged at my lips, soft but unwavering. I was no longer the fixer, the caretaker, or the afterthought. I was Violet, independent, strong, free. And finally, I was ready to live a life truly my own,